A former Academy Award-winning actor is one of the featured voices this week, and he's playing the Scorpion? This is the Superhero Pantheon. Now on this podcast, we will take 2 or 3 episodes of the Fox Kids version of Spider-Man that aired in the mid-90s and discuss/review. This is not for Pantheon eligibility, but it is a fun side project. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at The Real World are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you can do so by following us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian to Brain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian to Brain. Brian, today we will be talking about 3 different, I would say, of varying quality, various important villains to the Spider-Man canon, including Mysterio, Scorpion, and Kraven the Hunter. That's who we will be talking about tonight. The reason that we are doing 3 episodes, Brian, is because the way that it breaks down is there are 3 episodes here. The Venom trilogy, so to speak, is going to be coming up, and we wanted to cover that all in one shot. So we will be discussing Venom next week, before we take a 1-week break from Spider-Man to talk about The Batman. But we'll get to that in a couple weeks. So, Brian, tonight we'll be discussing the 3 episodes, episodes 5, 6, and 7. Brian, I want to start this conversation with you by saying I wish I could have seen the look on your face when Spider-Man made direct reference to both Ray Harryhausen and Roger Corman.
Listen, man, we talk about timing being everything. Boba Fett 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, whatever, had this reference to Ray Harryhausen with that scorpion creature coming out of the ground. And it's just been kind of in the pop culture ethos, I guess, for the last month or two, because there's been more references on Book of Boba Fett. And now all of a sudden this side project we're doing another direct reference to Ray Harryhausen. I don't know, man. I love his work, and if you haven't seen his stuff, it's he had his early work on the original King Kong, of course, Clash of the Titans, the 3 Sinbad films, which vary in quality, but the effects are amazing. Just amazing that he got a shout out here in 1994. All these years later, I'm one of the few still preaching his work. Because a lot of these Star Wars fans nowadays have no idea what that Scorpion was in reference to. And I keep bringing up Ray Harryhausen, and I have to bring up the original Clash of the Titans. So everything kind of coming together. I'm loving it. And the fact that Spider-Man, Peter Parker's a big fan of Ray Harryhausen himself, and to an extent Roger Corman. But that might be a little pot shot to the Fantastic Four movie. We can discuss that in a second. But I did notice too, especially I think it was Mysterio, this Mysterio episode in particular, they're making more and more references to other Marvel superheroes. So it feels like they're really building the universe step by step with little lines here, clobber in time, gamma radiation, little things like that. And they're really building up this big universe, I think, with these little lines and details to make it seem like, oh my God, he's talking about the Thing. Oh my God, he's talking about the Hulk. So I love where we're going. Even though these 3 episodes were not the best in terms of writing, it felt like some of it was kind of sped up with the backstory. And usually I like the best villains that are personally connected to Peter Parker. These 3 are not particularly, related in that kind of way. But they have fun. They do have some fun backstories. I do like Mysterio's backstory here more so than the movie, but we can discuss that in a second.
So I think part of what makes the Mysterio episode so weird is that the Spider-Man backstory gets randomly dropped in. We do not see Uncle Ben actually get murdered, but we do see specific references to Spider-Man doing some wrestling. He is referenced. We get a picture of him, and we kind of find out kind of his origin. So it's kind of weird that the Spider-Man origin is just thrown in here in kind of a random episode of the show, this being episode number 5. But I think the Mysterio one is the best of the 3 that we are going to be talking about this week, because you do get some tension with Spider-Man. And I think you mentioned that sped up quality. Like, we both get a background to Spider-Man, and we even get Peter Parker threatening to quit being Spider-Man at one point, which also is something, feels a little early in the run of the show for Spider-Man to be contemplating this. You know, I understand that this could be an important source of tension, but first season episode 5 feels a little bit early. But I did like I love the voice cast of the villains generally. I think they do a good job. And I think Mysterio is, again, on the theatrical side, similar to Dr. Octopus, but Mysterio is kind of even more theatrical because that's part of his background. So I like the voice cast here in terms of who they selected to play Mysterio. I like the tension with Spider-Man and MJ, and MJ does get a little bit of agency for herself, but ultimately, like, she's still really an object of desire, and that's really fascinating. And so those are kind of my thoughts. I have some very disparate thoughts, I guess you could say, but I think the thing that makes me happiest is just seeing Mysterio in a museum. And like, this is a tradition that goes back to the comic book and was even continued in Spider-Man Far From Home, where not Spider-Man himself, but his cohort, they end up in a museum, and the museum ends up being destroyed. So I definitely have a greater understanding of the appreciation of the history of Marvel and just how everything connects together.
Yeah, I like that Mysterio connection because in the cartoon, the comic, he's a special effects guy, kind of like that movie FX with, I think, Nick Nolte, with Eddie Murphy? Kind of like that. Or not Nick Nolte, there's another guy, but I'm confusing him. But he's a special effects artist. He has this big explosion on a bridge. Spider-Man comes in thinking it's a real thing. This is the flashback. And then he realizes that the guy put way too much explosives on the set. He reveals this to the cops, and he gets arrested for a year. And then a year later, he frames Spider-Man, just like the original run in the 60s and 80s, whenever they had a Mysterio episode. The same thing. It was like he's in a museum. He frames Spider-Man. It's this whole idea of the false identity and false, not a false arrest, but they falsely accuse him. He almost gets arrested. And then it leads to this whole thing about revealing that Mysterio has all this technology with holograms and all that thing. So they got the hologram technology in the movie and the animated show as well. But of course, in the movie, they had this connection with Tony Stark, which I know Jerome was not happy about. I was kind of iffy about, but I was kind of like, oh, at least they connected to the first movie in Iron Man. But the idea of him being an FX guy, special effects guy, I think really is a much better background, because then you don't have this obsession with Tony Stark again and all that stuff. And they don't even mention Tony Stark here, which is good, because it's like a fresh, clean slate, not connected to all that stuff. But at the same time, it's like, for a year, how does he come up with all this technology after being a year in prison and like all that kind of? But again, that's where comic book logic starts kicking in, and then the whole elaborate plot at the end, and then him trying to again frame Spider-Man. It just doesn't work. But I do like the fact that it's tradition. Like, because the whole idea of the museum is just great. Like, Spider-Man loves history. He's a scientific kid. So there's a lot of things there about, history and Spider-Man and the natural history museum kind of thing with Spider-Man. So I love that connection. And then what else you got here? This is probably the stronger of the 3 because it's got the closest connection to Spider-Man. The other 2 origin stories really don't. So, I'm glad they kind of took this route with the FX, but, Jake Gyllenhaal did a good job. It's just that connection to Tony Stark kind of threw me off a little bit. And then, I love the fact that even in the flashback of Peter Parker doing that wrestling show, somehow, for some reason, these animators and movie makers back in the day just thought that lying on your back with no one on top of you is a 3 count in wrestling. So I just love that because I see it in a lot of cartoons and movies. It's like we're gonna just have them lie on the ground and count 1, 2, 3, and that's it. And that's exactly what they did here. That's what happened to the Macho Man in the movie. So I just love this basic understanding of professional wrestling and the rules. And yeah, it was a fun ending. And I did love the fact that they got the line, great power comes with great responsibility. And they tied that in. But again, it was just so much thrown at you in the first 10 minutes that the second 10 minutes does slow down a bit. But it's just they threw a lot at you, especially with that background.
I would definitely agree that there's just a lot being thrown at you in these various episodes. One of the most important questions that I have for you, Brian, at one point, Jameson was being driven in something. What in the hell was he being driven in?
I don't know. These 90s cars, man, are like futuristic ideas of what cars are. I don't know. And Jameson seems to have a lot of money, a lot of money. And the fact that he knows that Peter Parker's always hanging around Spider-Man, the fact that he hasn't put 2 and 2 together yet, I think it just gets really like clear as day, especially these episodes. But again, comic book logic, man. What can you do?
So one of my great disappointments was the What If series from last year. I would really like to see a what if Mysterio was actually good and Spider-Man was evil, just to really play with this idea, especially if you could get Jake Gyllenhaal to come back and do the voiceover work for Mysterio. That's something I would really want to see, because it's always a situation where Mysterio is framing Spider-Man, but like, what if Spider-Man was actually evil and Mysterio was like the actual protagonist? That's something I want to see What If explore.
Yeah, that's a good idea, because I was kind of thinking that too. Like they're always playing with this idea, and they really took it to like to the nth degree in the movies, obviously, especially with the ending of the European one, European Vacation, I'm calling it, and the third one. So yeah, they really have this idea of teasing you and confusing you, because even when they had the original trailers for Far From Home or whatever, yeah, Far From Home, and you had the thing with Mysterio, they were telling you that he's a good guy, and everyone's just like, come on, man, no way. And then you even had some people questioning, like, well, what if they do change it? Because Kevin Feige has this thing about changing characters. So there's always that notion that behind it. So you could definitely play with that in a What If episode.
Okay, let's talk about the sting of the Scorpion. No, Steve Borden does not have anything to do with this episode, but Martin Landau does. Academy Award winner Martin Landau. I believe he won this award this same year that Spider-Man came out. Brian, what did Martin Landau win an Academy Award for? I'm kind of putting you on the spot. Do you know what he won for?
I know it's for Bela Lugosi. I'm forgetting Ed Wood, right?
Yes,
Okay,
it was for Tim Burton's Ed Wood.
You want another wrestling connection?
Because George the Animal Steel plays the French Angel, correct?
Correct. A lot of wrestling references in this set of episodes here, huh? Kind of weird.
Yeah, it's pretty funny just how everything connects back to wrestling. Speaking of connections, Peter Parker is walking with Felicia again because Peter Parker cannot decide which attractive woman he wants to be with. So I do like that they talk about not dating, and apparently both Felicia and Mary Jane Watson are just using Spider-Man or Peter Parker for his brain. I think that's pretty amusing to me. But then we get Spider-Man being blowed up by a brand new villain who is Scorpion, as played by one Martin Landau. We get a Human Torch reference. Brian, we are getting so many Fantastic Four references. It is shocking to me that the Fantastic Four don't have a role in this show. That's weird, right?
I'm trying to look it up now, but I'm pretty sure it came in 90. Okay, it came out in 94 as well. So that's why they're dropping all these references, because the Fantastic Four also dropped that year in the cartoon. So that makes a lot of sense now, because I was like, I thought it came in like 96, 97, but 94 makes a lot more sense now, because they mentioned the thing, like I mentioned before, clobbering time, all that stuff. They really want the kids to go out and realize, oh my God, they're all connected. And of course, Kevin Feige took that idea years later, and look where we are.
Well, I think the weirdest thing to me about this entire episode is the fact that the Scorpion is turning into a real Scorpion. I assume that is playing with some of the comic book logic, but I mean, look, there are good Spider-Man villains. Like, I would say Doc Ock and Green Goblin are like your top level. Venom is definitely thrown in there as well, I think. And then you've got your like B squad of like Rhino, Electro, and Scorpion. I mean, for me, Scorpion is kind of bottom of the barrel. I think he's fundamentally uninteresting, and I think there's a reason that he's really only played a small part in one of the Spider-Man movies, and we've basically seen every other villain, including Rhino and Electro, for better and for worse. But yeah, that's I think what makes this episode not work is just the Scorpion character himself. But I do think it's interesting, Brian. We get a Fantastic Four reference. We also get a Tick reference as well.
See, that was the other thing too. I don't know who owned. Was that Marvel? Or that's independent owned. I don't even know because
I know that Tick was on Fox Kids, so I assumed that was the connection, but it was still fascinating to me. Like, what is the crossover audience between the Tick and Spider-Man?
What's amazing is that I think of the live action show, so that kind of tells you where my mind was at. Because I wasn't really a Tick fan for the cartoon at all, but I did remember the live action show. So again, they're really throwing all these references and they're making the kids go crazy, and it's making us go crazy right now, all these years later. So. But you mentioned the backstory of the Scorpion being really bad. I mean, they really took this guy who was just kind of like really wanted to get paid, and it really made Jonah Jameson look like a really like sadistic son of a bitch without him realizing it, because he's genetically altering this guy's DNA and he doesn't even realize it, even though he paid the scientist to do it. Very dark territory for Jameson. It feels like this is maybe too dark for him to go down. Like, it's really like kind of like a Dr. Frankenstein type situation by the end of it, because Scorpion is like this genetically altered monster now. You know what I mean? And I guess it is kind of like an introduction to the neogenics that's going to be a big part of season 2, with Spider-Man growing all those extra arms and crazy shit like that. But this is kind of the start of that, and it feels really fucked up. It really does, because like they took this man's innocent life and turned him into this monster. But then it gets really crazy when he's like, I need nuclear energy because I need to go back to how I was before. And he's like, you're going to destroy the city. I don't care. I need nuclear energy. So that's kind of where the story and the script kind of goes downhill a little bit after that. But, I mean, the chase was fun. I mean, that part was cool when he's chasing the Scorpion across the city and the acid and all that stuff. But, yeah, I mean, it really made Jonah look bad. And is this the episode where they showed Jonah's backstory with his wife?
I did not have that in my notes, but I do have it in my notes that Jameson is being a dick, and he gets captured and has to be saved once again. Still won't admit that Spider-Man is a hero, even though Spider-Man saves him. So, yeah, this is just, there's a lot of weird stuff with Jameson, because, I mean, I think to an extent you are riding a really fine line with Jameson, because I think he has to be like antagonistic enough to dislike Spider-Man, but not antagonistic enough to just flat out side with the villains. And I think the Sam Raimi movies did a really good job of that, because one of the most important scenes that you always mention is that when push came to shove, like, that version of Jameson did not throw Peter Parker under the bus. Like, even though he was an asshole, but like when push came to shove, like, he wasn't a complete dick. Like, this J. Jonah Jameson, I mean, we are almost talking about a Lex Luthor-like character.
Yeah, it's a little jarring, because he wasn't this obsessive in the first episodes, but I think they take a step back from this, because I don't remember Jameson being this crazy and obsessive like to this point ever after this. But he does acknowledge that. And the backstory I want to mention is that I guess that he was reporting on some kind of criminal network back in the day, and they put a hit on him or something. And one of the person that went to shoot him had a mask on and accidentally shot his wife. Now, I can't remember if his wife's dead or not, but that would create this interesting backstory of why he's obsessed with Spider-Man, because Spider-Man is this masked vigilante, quote unquote, but he doesn't trust them, and he doesn't trust people with masks on. Find it ironic that he turned a dude, into the Scorpion with a mask on, but still, that's kind of that interesting backstory that I don't think we got in the movies, and I kind of want to see that explored a little bit, but again, it's that Sam Raimi verse that we might not be able to explore anymore, but maybe the Jameson, the current MCU we can, but it feels like there is this backstory that we never got, that I was like, oh, that makes a lot more sense now that he hates vigilantes with masks on because of his wife, and I thought that was a good connection. But they kind of just brushed over that, and they kind of made this resolution about it at the end. But still, it just made Jameson look really like over the top and like spending probably billions of dollars on this technology that's turning this dude into a scorpion. But Martin Landau was doing the best that he could. I could barely tell it was him up until maybe the end when he started talking normally. And then I was like, oh, yeah, that is Martin Landau. So
the one thing, I believe this is also our introduction to Nugenics. Nugenics will play an extremely important role in the series moving forward.
And that's the X-Men episode tie-in. So there you go. Coming soon in season 2.
Yeah, I am. I'm so excited to talk about that because I recently rewatched a clip of it. So we're going to be definitely getting into the X-Men a little bit and some of the history there. But let's talk about Kraven the Hunter. This is probably my least favorite of the episodes that we have watched so far because I do not think Kraven the Hunter is an interesting character at all. To me, this felt very similar to the Lizard episode in that you kind of have this tragic backstory of a guy who's kind of trying to help out and his wife is involved. And in the end, he gets cured. So you do get a little bit with Peter and Felicia again, kind of staying away from Mary Jane. So I guess there's kind of they tease kind of a love triangle between Peter and his two ladies. So that's interesting. But for me, this episode was just kind of there. And I love the idea that the final battle takes place in a quote unquote African jungle site. I'm not sure how well that plays in 2022, but it's definitely a choice that the show made.
I mean, the fact that they had these clips and they animated these scenes from Africa and had no like black people in it, that was kind of interesting. But this Kraven the Hunter interpretation is kind of like this toxic masculinity idea that they didn't really like. It's kind of like Wreck-It Ralph 2. You know what I mean? It's like that toxic masculinity is really like the problem, and like it leads to him taking the serum or whatever. But there's just this weird backstory that they just threw at you with all these details that it felt like it should have been a two-parter. Because when they show the backstory of Kraven and Mariah or whatever, going to meet that other scientist who took a serum and is now living with the lions or whatever, and he's like got this giant lion's mane and he's living in the jungle. There's like a lot of weird stuff going on, and he seems to just disappear. And then he gives her one vial left of the serum, ends up giving it to Kraven because Kraven gets attacked by a bunch of lions or whatever. Just some crazy shit. Of course, there's no blood, which kind of sucks, but you can just imagine if this was like animated today with some little edgier themes to play with, there would definitely be a lot of blood and lion blood and all that kind of thing and all that gruesomeness, because this felt like it should have been a gruesome interpretation, because Kraven seems like this vicious hunter or whatever. Whenever I think of Kraven the Hunter, I think of Quint from Jaws. Like that's kind of like my interpretation of what Kraven should be, like a really obsessive hunter but has seen some shit, not necessarily relying on his strength. I want to see him rely on his wits and the traps. Like they kind of show that here with the traps and stuff. But I want more of that. And then another joke about wrestling. This guy looks like a wrestler. He dresses like one. I thought that was hilarious. But yeah, just the backstory of Kraven was just so weird and like so many details lacking. I know they go back to it somewhat because I think Mariah turns into some kind of creature as well, and then they need to help her later on, and Kraven has to come back. But man, there's just a lot of weird genetic things going on in this episode too. Also, maybe some lion abuse, I want to say, because like they go to the zoo.
A definite possibility of lion abuse. We do need to point that out. I think so. For me, the biggest difference between Spider-Man and X-Men, and I know that Spider-Man definitely gets into more serialized storytelling as we get into like the second season, because each season is basically like an extended arc. So I'm curious to know if this comment is going to hold up, because it's been a while since I've quite honestly watched these episodes. But X-Men was not afraid to do like 2, 3, 4-part arcs. And I think it doesn't feel as rushed. And I think you're able to develop the characters a lot more naturally without being like, okay, this is who this character is. This is their background. This is a flashback. Like, you don't really get that in the X-Men series, which is weird because there are a lot more characters. So it feels like the way that X-Men, the animated series, and even Batman to an extent, developed their characters was a lot more precise than Spider-Man, and it feels less clunky.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's because they needed to build a rogues gallery for Spider-Man to do the Sinister Six at the beginning of season 2, because that's what it feels like. It feels like they're building up all the characters in season 1 to get to that point, but then it's kind of like sacrificing a lot of the backstory, like these 3 episodes. Like all these 3 episodes, maybe the Mysterio one, I would say maybe you don't need to do a 2-parter, but it feels like you should do a 2-parter for these, especially like the debut of villains. Because we got the same kind of issue with the Lizard. You got that rush beginning, and then it kind of like it settled down at the end. It settles down at the end here too, but I just feel like it could have done a lot more. And there was like a lot of confusion because there was that dude that he's working with at the newspaper, his friend's house that he was using, that he was on vacation. Robbie. But like, I don't think Robbie knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. So why does Spider-Man say, "I'm so sorry to put you in harm's way, my friend"? They're not even like, Spider-Man and Robbie are not friends. It's Peter Parker and Robbie who are friends. So I think they kind of slipped up there. And then there was just more confusion because like Robbie doesn't know what's going on. And then Kraven goes to his house and like, "My wife was here. You're the other lover," or whatever. And that Russian accent, man, I don't know. I think they could have eased up a little bit. But also I did some research. It's actually the same voice as this Mysterio. The same voice actor as Mysterio, so there's a little tie there.
I can definitely hear that, and
Yeah.
I'm curious to know. So next week we are going to be reviewing the Venom trilogy, and I'm curious to know how that's going to feel because that is a 3-parter. So that's, instead of trying to cram all of this into 20 minutes, we're going to get a little bit more room to breathe when we talk about the Venom trilogy. So I'm so curious to know how it's going to feel compared to this episode, and even compared to Spider-Man 3, because Spider-Man 3 is not good. But I know that this comic book arc is hugely important to the history of Spider-Man, so I'm curious to know, for comparison's sake, how this will feel. So when we talk next week, Brian, I want us to kind of return to this and talk about just if the storytelling feels less clunky and more elegant compared to these first 7 episodes. And I haven't. I think that the Mysterio episode was good. The Doc Ock episode has probably been the strongest so far, and I feel like the Kraven episode has been the weakest.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page as you. I just feel like these 3 episodes were definitely setting up the Sinister Six, and that's kind of like the path they were going on. But I do remember the Venom trilogy, or those 3 episodes, being much slower and much more built up, especially with Eddie Brock's build up to absorbing the Venom suit and accepting the evilness within him, kind of thing. So I'm really looking forward to that. But also want to mention this Kraven interpretation. For some reason, man, I can't help but think of Jermaine Clement and his like What We Do in the Shadows type character, but just like jacked. And that's kind of how I picture Kraven the Hunter with this interpretation. I know that sounds like really cliche and over the top, but man, I now I can't help but think maybe Jermaine Clement can do something with that, because he does have that mustache and that European look.
It's funny that you say that, because I'm kind of thinking of his What We Do in the Shadows equivalent on the TV show. I was thinking about Matthew Barry. That's kind of who I would want to play Kraven the Hunter, because I just want Matthew Barry in the MCU. I think he is so good on What We Do in the Shadows. Brian, you've seen the Jackie Daytona episode of What We Do in the Shadows, right?
I watched it twice, man, because you brought me
it's
on
incredible.
that show.
He is so incredible.
He's so good.
I think he would be a great, I think if you're going to go in the direction of Kraven the Hunter, I almost think you need somebody like a Matthew Barry or Jermaine Clement. I think you almost need to have like a comedic person play them, because that's the only way it'll work. If you have, if you brought, I'm just going to pull a name, that somebody who has someone like Kenneth Branagh, who probably would never do it, but someone like him would play it too seriously. And I think you almost need somebody to kind of do it with a wink and a nod.
And, Jermaine Clement does give off that, like, sexy vibe whenever he's trying. You know what I mean? It's kind of funny the way he does it, but it works. It's like that Austin Powers sexiness that kind of works for some women. So it does, and with the way that Kraven is dressed in this show, like, that's totally what Jermaine Clement could totally rock right now, and even with the lion hair and everything, and still make it work, I think.
All right, so we will be discussing the Venom trilogy of episodes next week, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm really excited because it feels like this is like the real start of the show. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.
I'm Mac Gargan. Wanna wrestle?